We are live, Marty.
All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. I'm Marty Dahl, Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Victoria. Due to construction taking place in our City Council chambers, we are conducting this evening's meeting and public hearing virtually. But even in a virtual setting, we do want to make sure that our public meetings continue in an open and transparent manner. If you are watching us live online right now and would like to provide input during tonight's public hearing, please call 1-408-418-9388 and enter meeting ID 126-582-8343. Again, that number is 1-408-418-9388, and the meeting ID is 126-924-3601. Those instructions are also on our website at victoria.civicweb.net/portal. For anyone that is planning to join us by phone, please be aware of these important notes and instructions. Callers will be muted until the public hearing begins. You'll be prompted by the Planning Commission Chair to speak at the appropriate time. We ask that anyone wishing to address the Commission follow the Chair's prompts, be respectful, wait for their turn to speak, and don't speak over one another. Callers will still need to provide their names and addresses for the record. It is important that everyone be able to hear each other and the discussion, so please speak loudly, speak clearly, and speak directly into your phone or microphone. We are streaming this meeting live and are recording it so it can be viewed later on demand. If you'd like to view any of the visuals from tonight's presentation, you can watch that live stream of the meeting online at victoria.civicweb.net/portal. Click on the live stream button toward the middle of the screen. We do have a quorum of Planning Commission members as well as our presenters participating in this meeting remotely. And finally, different from when we are in person, all actions of the Planning Commission will be taken by a roll call vote. Thank you, and I will turn it over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Marty. I will now call this meeting to order. Our first order of business tonight is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Members of the Planning Commission, this is just a reminder, please state your name when moving and seconding, and please remember to mute your microphones when you are not speaking to avoid background noise. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the final agenda?
Yes, Commissioner Iverson, I would move to adopt tonight's meeting agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Mary Jo Gar, second.
I have a motion made by Commissioner Iverson, seconded by Commissioner Gar. I'm now going to take the roll call vote. Commissioner Kuhn?
Aye.
Commissioner Gar?
Aye.
Commissioner Iverson?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Swarting?
Aye.
Chair Stensland? Aye. Thank you. The motion carries. Our next order of business is to adopt the minutes from our October 7th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
This Commissioner Iverson, I move to approve the minutes from the meeting October 7th, 2020.
Thank you, Commissioner Iverson. Is there a second?
Commissioner Kuhn, seconds.
Thank you. I have a motion made by Commissioner Iverson, seconded by Commissioner Kuhn. I will now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Kuhn?
Aye.
Commissioner Gar?
Aye.
Commissioner Iverson?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Swarting?
Aye.
Chair Stensland? Aye. Thank you. Motion
Chair
carries.
Stensland?
We're now going to move on to the discussion items. Commissioner,
Chair Stensland, can I interrupt for a second?
Please.
I do believe that Christian Peterson, alternative 2, is on the line since we are missing a few planning commissioners tonight. Commissioner Pedersen will be an alternative and voting member.
Okay.
There he is.
Thanks.
Thanks. Sorry.
We're okay. We'll just include him going forward. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome, Commissioner Pedersen. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. I was on time, but my daughter's turned my computer off, so sorry about that.
Okay. We are now moving on to discussion items. Just a second reminder, please mute your microphones while you are not speaking to avoid background noise. Thank you. Tonight we have 2 items for discussion and action on our agenda. The second will include a public hearing. Information to participate in the public hearing is included in the published agenda at the city's website. I will provide call-in instructions for anyone wishing to participate before we move on to that agenda item. First, however, let's move on to our non-public hearing item. Our first item for discussion tonight is item 3.1, Shoreland Management Ordinance. Staff is asking the Planning Commission to consider recommending approval of the updated ordinance after tonight's presentation and discussion. I will now turn it over to Community and Economic Development Director Marty Dahl for staff presentation. Marty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, I believe, I don't want to jinx us, but I believe we may be at the end of our long shoreline management ordinance process. As you'll recall, we started this very early in the year. We've had several meetings with this group, with the Lakes and Water Quality Committee, have brought it before the City Council for a workshop early on to discuss. And we have now received feedback from the DNR based on the ordinance we sent from our last meeting. And I believe we are very close to having something that is acceptable by the DNR and hopefully something that the Planning Commission feels they can recommend this evening. So tonight we're going to walk through some of that DNR feedback and some of the subsequent revisions that have been made. There's been several conversations between staff and the DNR over the last month since that feedback did come in and we last discussed this. So we will talk through some of those highlights. We will give a presentation on those areas that we're looking at changing from the last time you saw the ordinance. And then we'll be asking the commission to have a discussion and then provide a recommendation if they so feel obliged to for the council to consider adopting that ordinance in November. So as you know, the updated ordinance with some of the DNR feedback for background was included in your background packet tonight. So hopefully you had an opportunity to review that and see some of the specific responses from the DNR in some of those areas. The areas we've pulled out to highlight are there are several definitions that we've made some modifications to our nonconformities section, our shoreline classification system section, lot area and width standards, special residential lot provisions, placement, height, and design of structures, vegetation management, stormwater management, and then the proposed setback variance in the PUD section. So I will go through these items. Feel free to interrupt at any time if you have questions. I know it's a little more awkward to do that virtually, but feel free to jump in if there's some things you'd like to discuss as I'm going through. So the first definition that's just slightly modified since the last time we saw the ordinance is the definition for deck. This actually stemmed from some questions related to how to handle a deck with setbacks and whether it would be a principal or accessory structure or a part of the principal structure. So this revision is really to say that if the deck is either attached or if it directly abuts the principal structure, it is subject to the principal structure setbacks. We made some modifications to the detached deck section, patio and detached deck section to clarify that as well, but just a minor modification so that if a deck is attached or if it is directly abutting the home, it would be subject to those principal structure setbacks. The second item, and this is an item for discussion, it is not necessarily the definition of dwelling or dwelling unit, though this is where the feedback came from the DNR with their question. And the question from the DNR was, should accessory or will accessory dwelling units be allowed within a shoreland district? So most of you are probably familiar when we're talking accessory dwelling units. Those are often the the granny pod type things in the backyard, or the tiny homes, the second smaller living unit on a property. The city does currently allow accessory dwelling units in its residential districts, or zoning code does allow that as a conditional use. There is not a lot of standards for that. I think the intention is that it would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis as a conditional use. But the DNR said that if our intent is that they would be allowed, then in the shoreland language governing those ADUs would need to be added to the ordinance language. If we choose not to allow them in the shoreland district, we would just include them as a non-allowable use in our table. So just for a little background before I'll turn it over for discussion, the current zoning code definition in the city's code for accessory dwelling unit is a residential dwelling unit located on the same lot as a single family dwelling unit, either within the same building or in a detached building. So the intent would be to determine from the Planning Commission whether or not we think these should be allowed in the shoreland district. And if so, this is the language that was included in the DNR model ordinance governing those ADUs that had been struck in previously, but we would need to add this back in, essentially stating that one accessory dwelling unit may be allowed on lots that meet or exceed the duplex lot area and width dimensions. So it would not necessarily be for all single family lots. It would have to have a lot area and width of a duplex. And then with the following standards, including that it must be located within what would be the lot area for that duplex. It can't be, if you have a 5-acre lot, it can't be way off on the other side of that lot. That it cannot be more than 700 square feet and must not exceed 15 feet in height, and that it needs to be designed to reduce visibility as viewed from the water with vegetation, topography, etc. So with that, I will turn it over to the commission to have a discussion as to whether or not we think these should or should not be allowed in shoreland districts.
Commissioners, thoughts or comments? Anyone want to start?
This is Commissioner Pedersen. I just have one question. Is this in addition to the garages that we were talking about, or is this the garage that we were talking about?
This would likely be in addition. I think that if we were to determine that ADUs are to be allowed, and it may be helpful even if we decide they're not to be allowed in shoreline districts because they are allowed as a conditional use in other areas, we may want to revise our accessory structure ordinance to speak a little more clearly as to how many buildings, right? Does this now allow you to have both a detached garage and an accessory dwelling unit? Do you still want to have that limitation that if you've got an attached garage, you should only have the one additional larger structure? So right now that is not clearly spelled out in the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. I mean, in my viewpoint, I would say you get one or the other. But there's going to be special cases for all of it, but I just wouldn't want to see a compound looking like situation with the storage structure and then the grandparents' house and tree house and other things like that going up. Anyway, my 2 cents.
Hey, Commissioners, any other questions, comments?
This is Commissioner Schwarting. Do a lot of these exist today?
I am unaware of any specifically outside of a few somewhat indirectly accessory dwelling units. We do have one situation where we have a property that currently has two principal structures on it, but it was part of a previous land divide and combination. So there was some grandfathering in of that structure. And I think just internally for zoning, we treat that second structure as an ADU, but it wouldn't be what you'd traditionally think of as an ADU. That's the only one that I'm aware of off the top of my head. We have not had any applications for any of these in the 10 months that I have been here.
Hey, Marty, so the one that you're discussing right now, is that in the Shoreland area or is that residential area?
It is in the Shoreland area.
Okay. Do we have many in the residential area?
Again, not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any. That's not to say there aren't any out there, but I've never come across any properties that have those ADUs with any of the applications or things that I've seen since I've been here.
What's the feeling from staff? What are your thoughts on this, Marty?
I think that I agree with Commissioner Pedersen. I think that if we are to allow it, and I had thought about this as we were preparing for tonight's meeting, we do need to tweak the accessory structure section of code a little bit, just to be very clear. I think you probably would not want an attached garage, a detached garage, and an ADU. You probably want to add that ADU into your 2 or 3, which would then become your two of 4 choice combination when it comes to those accessory structures. But I would say from a consistency standpoint, with our other residential districts, being that they are allowed as a conditional use, the DNR having some restrictions as to where they can be and how big they can be, I think that creating it as a conditional use within a shoreland would also be reasonable.
Yeah, personally, I tend to agree with that also. I think, they're, especially with that, duplex lot size, and as long as we don't have too many structures, if this was the only, additional structure, this, could work out really well on that property. But we just, I think need some standards to make sure, like Commissioner Pedersen said, and you just said, we don't have, all these outbuildings on this lot, and just gets crowded quickly.
This wouldn't conflict with a boathouse. Suddenly a boathouse now can have a bathroom and a shower. I mean, how does the ADU differ from that? Because we had a lot of conversations regarding that. This is short.
An ADU would need to meet principal structure setback, so it would have to meet that principal structure ordinary high water line setback. So you wouldn't be able to have it down as a water-oriented accessory structure 10 feet from the water.
So plumbing, so it can.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead, Laura.
So the structure could have plumbing to it?
Yeah. I mean, I think the intention of these ADUs, which are becoming more popular, these tiny home type concepts, is that yes, they would be a livable quarters. They'd have sanitary, water, electricity. Obviously very small, 700 square feet at maximum would be what would be allowed in a shoreline district. But yes, that it would be basically it tackles that tiny home. You want to move your mother-in-law into your property and give her own space, that type of thing.
Is there language within this that requires it to have so much land area?
Yes, it would need to meet the duplex lot area standards. So that varies from lake classification to lake classification, but it is in general, it's larger than what the single family lot area, which we've spent a lot of time discussing in our different lake classifications. It would need to meet those duplex lot area standards. So it would have to be a pretty large lot.
This is Commissioner Iverson. Yeah, I would concur with Commissioner Pedersen that one or the other. And in the outstate area, I'm actually familiar with a number of situations where if there's room, there will be another structure. And that we would want to avoid. So I think that as the verbiage would be the route to go.
Comments, commissioners? Any other thoughts?
This is Commissioner Schwartering. I actually would be okay to not allow them. I think it really hurts the area. Especially talk about a tiny, you can start bringing stuff in a trailer.
Marty, I have a question. I appreciate you elaborating a little bit on the classification for the land area, but since I am not, don't have that lot area in front of me, can you help us understand approximately how large that area might be, please?
I can. Let me pull it up right here. So that would be for duplex. If we are in our current city limits, so our developed lakes, general development lake requires it to be a PUD. So that would essentially not allow these on Lake Minnetonka the way it's written right now. Recreational development lake is an acre for riparian, 26,000 for non-riparian. Natural environment lakes are 70,000 for riparian and 35,000 for non-riparian. And those are the same for our undeveloped lakes. Our duplex standards would be the same for both within the city limits and in the annexation area.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
So we're hearing a little bit of both from, it sounds like, in the discussion. Yeah, I'm making an assumption. What I'm hearing is we may be okay with this, but we absolutely want to be able to control how many buildings are on that lot. And I'm not sure what the best way to do that if we were to move forward with this.
Yeah, Chair, I think if a majority of the Planning Commission would prefer to keep it as an allowed use, as a allowed conditional use, I think what staff would then do is make some tweaks to our accessory structure definition. We'll actually be talking about that, or section, sorry. We'll be talking about that section of the code in our next item on the agenda because we've already got some proposed changes in there. I think it's something that we could incorporate as part of our discussion and actually be able to get something redlined in before those zoning changes would go before the council. So I think that's the process staff would use if a majority of the commission wishes to move forward with it as a allowed conditional use.
Commissioners, what your thoughts on that?
This is Commissioner Moore. I am comfortable with this addition to the ordinance update.
I'm going to go through them just to try and make it a little bit easier. Commissioner Kuhn?
I'm fine with the update to the ordinance.
Commissioner Iverson?
I would be in agreement with that also. Thank you.
And we just heard from Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Schwarting, I know you had mentioned, you'd be okay with not allowing it at all. Are you
Right.
comfortable with kind of?
Yes, I can live with the recommendation. I support it.
Okay. And Commissioner Pedersen?
Yep, agreement with it.
Okay. So I think, for right now, we're good with that, and it sounds like we're going to talk about that a little bit later this evening, Marty. So
yeah. Yep.
Great. Okay.
All right. So moving on with some of our DNR feedback. So we do have some minor edits that have been made to the impervious surface standards. One of them, this is actually a internal staff proposal. It is something after a building inspector took a look at some of these items within the Shoreland district. We are proposing moving the exception of an accessory structure square footage that counts towards impervious from 120 to 200 square feet. The reason for that is that the 120 square feet used to be the standard for when a building permit was triggered. So any shed or something that was in excess of 120 square feet would need to get a building permit. And the language was put in here to avoid some potential issues if a shed that was smaller than what needed a building permit did not get a zoning permit and went up, so that we didn't have these administrative items and trying to chase down these sheds if looking at impervious surface. So it was written into the code that anything under 120 square feet would not count towards impervious. The building permit standard has since changed since this definition was last updated, and that is now 200 square feet. So something, again, I think for the commission to consider as to whether or not you're comfortable with any sheds or smaller accessory structures that are 200 square feet or less not counting towards impervious. And then the additional changes to this definition, we're adding in concrete as also an impervious surface. Some changing around of our language here, our list, just so that it read properly. And then putting in an exception for any swimming pools that had been permitted prior to when we anticipate the ordinance being adopted, that their pool surface will not count towards the impervious surface maximum, in case they, with their pool, were under the impression that they still had 500 square feet of impervious remaining, and then we change this ordinance and they wish to do a 500 square foot addition that they would have had impervious to do prior to this ordinance change. This would essentially exempt those existing pools in the Shoreland area from counting towards the impervious surface. So there's a few things to unpack in there. I think I'll turn that one back over to you, Chair, as well, to talk about.
And I'm going to turn it over to the committee. Any comments or questions?
So I'm just kind of curious what permitted means. So if a property owner is to design a swimming pool and it's just seriously a concept and it's not a final plan for a swimming pool, would that be a plan that would be approved prior to November 9th? So long as it, was the previous impervious surface agreed area?
Commissioner Moore, commissioners, we do have a swimming pool permit that is inspected and approved by our building inspector. It does require plans and surveys, so it's very comparable to a building permit when folks are looking to get a swimming pool. This would really mean if there are any open permits, say someone actually has an approved swimming pool permit, but they haven't actually constructed the structure yet, that their permit would still be valid and the calculations would still be working off of the old impervious surface definition. So it would truly mean only any approved swimming pool permit. In theory, could someone come up in the next 2 weeks and want to get a pool permitted prior to November 9th? Yeah, they probably could. I don't know how likely that would be, but would be possible that someone could come and want to get a swimming pool permit approved prior to the 9th.
Just in order to try and keep this moving a little bit, I think I'll just kind of run through again like I did last time. Commissioner Kuhn, do you have any questions, comments?
I guess the only comment, if you're breaking out concrete and gravel, do you put in asphalt in there? So that if somebody's putting a asphalt pathway down to the lake or somewhere, that gets counted as impervious surface or permeable surface.
Yep, we could certainly add that.
And I guess the
From
other
our
thing
asphalt
is,
guy.
well, even the permeable walkways and patios, you know, again, if they aren't kept up, you know, what's the regulation on those, you know?
I think if I don't want to speak for Marty, but I think we're going to touch on that later as we come to impervious surfaces.
Yes, we will. When we've actually got some the definition of permeable patios and walkways again.
That's all I got. Otherwise, I'm fine.
Catch. Commissioner Gar? Any questions or comments? I'll come back. Commissioner Iverson?
Yeah, I'm actually fine with that based on our previous meeting discussions.
Thank you. Commissioner Moore?
I think this update is acceptable.
Thank you. Commissioner Schwarting?
Yeah, I like the update. I think it's good.
And Commissioner Pedersen?
Update is good.
All right, I will move on then.
All right. Thank you.
So the next item is there were some tweaks made to our definitions of lot, non-riparian lot, and riparian lot. As you'll recall, we initially had modified the definition for non-riparian and riparian lots to try to plan for the event of a property that wasn't necessarily right up to the water's edge, but was close, and we had landed on 100 feet as kind of our buffer area. Say it was 50 feet and there was a 50-foot buffer of a different property from being able to use the non-riparian lot standards. We had decided that a non-riparian lot should be at least 100 feet from the water before it could be considered a non-riparian property. The DNR was concerned about changing the definition of non-riparian and riparian in that way. So we have addressed that setback issue a little farther down in the ordinance. So we're still accomplishing what I think we discussed. It's just not within the definition. And we'll talk about that when we get there. And then we also are just modifying the definition of lot to be what our current zoning code standard for lot is. Any questions with those?
Any questions?
I like this. I think more concrete definitions is always good. I am in favor.
Agreed.
All right. So patio or detached deck, this was related to the slight modification in deck, and this really just cleaned up. We had a little bit of a wordy definition that I had initially written when we looked at this last time. The DNR told me it was probably a little more than it needed to be, so we really cleaned this definition up to just state that a patio or a detached deck by definition is an accessory structure. If it's a detached deck, it's not going to be a regular deck, so it's not going to be a principal structure. And a patio, even if it's not, depending on the separation, a patio is going to only have to meet the setbacks of the accessory structure. Any questions on this one?
Good.
All right, so here's the item on permeable patio and walkway. You will see that this definition from the DNR was really more addition by subtraction. So the DNR was very open to this. They were very open to allowing that 2% additional coverage if you're using permeable patio and walkways. But they indicated their preference would be to just have that conform to the specifications in the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Stormwater Manual, which, as I understand, has a pretty good segment on these permeable patios and walkways. So they were concerned about the using installed per industry standards. Does that get too confusing? Does it muddy the waters? They also didn't want to have just a couple of specific examples that would be within part of that manual for what's needed for a permeable patio. So their recommendation was to just note that it needs to conform to those specs in the MPCA stormwater manual. Any questions on this one?
Commissioner Moore here. Why would they strike appropriate soils and site conditions? Can you give us background on that?
Yeah, Commissioner Moore, commissioners, that's what I was referring to. Is the Minnesota Stormwater Manual actually has multiple requirements for these permeable patios and walkways. So by just referring that it needs to meet those specifications, you are now encompassing all of those specifications versus trying to call out a few of them, which may or may not be worded identically to what is in the stormwater manual. So you're potentially creating some confusion if you're saying you need to follow these specs. We're telling you a couple of the requirements that are related to that, but not all of them, and they may not be apples to apples requirements. So that was the DNR's thought process on asking that those two bullets be struck.
Any other questions, commissioners?
All right.
All right.
So non-conformities. First, the good news is that the DNR did approve this flexibility request for non-conformities. They did ask that we do a slight modification to the requirements as to what you need to do to be able to either do a tear down and rebuild with a non-conformity or an addition with a non-conformity. We had initially spoken with the Lakes and Water Quality Committee, and their preference was to not necessarily require only a shoreline buffer establishment. They wanted to be able to provide options. The DNR's concern was that the shoreline buffer, and introducing a shoreline buffer if one does not exist, really is the most important and best thing that can happen. So they wanted to make that as that's what you need to do unless there already is a buffer or it's not applicable for some reason. So the language modification essentially just indicates that you need to install a buffer, and then if the buffer is not applicable or if a buffer already exists, then you may do some of these other things like a rain garden or a catch basin or a swale. The DNR also wanted us to add some standards to what that buffer needs to be, and this was an example of some buffer language from other cities that they use when they're putting in standards for a shoreline buffer. So it states that it would consist of trees, shrubs, and low ground cover of native plants and understory consistent with natural cover shorelines in the area. It shall cover a minimum of 80% of the property shoreline and at a depth of at least 10 feet inward from the ordinary high water line. So any questions with this item?
I think it looks good.
All right. Moving on. So we did get some additional clarification on the shoreline classification systems. So one of the items that we had discussed was the question about Sunny Lake and Zumbra Sunny. So I did get some clarification on that. The DNR considers Zumbra Sunny is essentially Zumbra. So Zumbra would continue to be a recreational development lake. What is considered Sunny Lake that we currently have classified as a natural environment lake is actually an unclassified lake with the DNR. So the quote unquote Sunny Lake is actually unclassified. Zumbra Sunny is just Zumbra, which is recreational development. And in the process of getting that clarification, the DNR did indicate there were 4 additional water bodies that they wanted to add into their classification system and make sure they are within the ordinance. The 2 natural environment areas up here, natural environment classifications, are within the Carver Park Reserve, or mostly within the Carver Park Reserve. And then there are these 2 additional that are not really lakes, they're more of a wetland watershed down within our area. Now, from a just kind of eye test standard, one would think that something like this would be considered more of a natural environment lake. But as part of the DNR's review of this, again, they want to be, what's the word I'm looking for? They want to be supportive and understanding of current conditions. And we currently have most of these areas around this watershed wetland developed and built with lots that much more closely resemble what a recreational development lot standard is. So their recommendation was, let's add them into the list, but we will classify them underneath recreational development so that they do not create a ton of non-conformities by adding that classification. So that's why that seems kind of strange that this is really more of a wetland, but it would be classified as a recreational development lake for the development standards. Any questions on that?
Marty, can you comment on what lake that is for the recreational development?
Yeah, it really isn't a lake. It really is wetland. So this is Wasserman down here, and this is, I believe, Carl Cray. So this is really kind of that wetland, marshy area in between. So it really isn't a lake per se, as one would traditionally think of a lake. But it is apparently my understanding at the level that the DNR does want it to be classified as something that needs to be considered with the Shoreland ordinance.
So I'm just trying to understand this clearly. So if that's wetlands, why would it be a recreational development?
Yeah, well, let me see if I can pull up a map here. Give me
Because
one.
recreational development, I think Lake Minnetonka.
Or Isaac, do you have? I don't know if you've got the ability to share. I was going to say if you can pull up a map. Otherwise, I will.
I can pull mine up quick. I have it loaded up.
So we're really talking that you see that open wetland area that's developed all the way around it. That's the area that they want to classify. And as I stated, because it is mostly developed, and because these lot standards are the closest to what a lot standard for a recreational development lake would be, they're choosing to classify it as recreational development, essentially to help us to not have created a ton of non-conforming lots if that were to be classified as a natural environment classification.
That makes sense.
Any other questions on the lake classifications? I'll pull my PowerPoint back up here. All right. So the next area is our lot area and width standard. So there were a few minor modifications in this section. So this is where I mentioned we are still accomplishing that a lot that is closer than 100 feet from the high water line would need to follow riparian standards and not non-riparian standards. So this line here, that if the property line roughly parallel to the ordinary high water line of a non-riparian lot is less than 100 feet from the OHWL, that lot shall adhere to the riparian lot area and width standards. So that allows us to accomplish what we were trying to accomplish with that definition without changing the definition of a riparian or non-riparian. It just it states it essentially would need to meet the riparian standards for setbacks and lot width and lot area. And then we also did make some modifications here related to our unsewered parcels. So it was a bit vague, and we had a little bit of back and forth with the DNR. And what I think we are trying to accomplish, and again, the Planning Commission can tell me if I am off base here, but I think the intention is that we don't want to see large scale unsewered developments. We don't want to have someone come in with a 10-acre lot, subdivide that into 10 1-acre unsewered lots and build 10 unsewered lots. So this definition update states that it would be, where am I at here? I think I'm missing a bullet actually, because we do have, oh, here it is. So a lot of record at the time this ordinance was adopted. I just didn't highlight it in blue. That was the additional language here. So we modified that to say that it needs to be a lot of record at the time this ordinance was adopted, which then I think would preclude someone with a 10-acre unsewered lot from coming in and subdividing to the 1 acre or 2 acres for natural environment to be able to do an unsewered home on that. There'd be nothing to preclude them from putting a home on that 10-acre property, because we just state that it needs to be at least 1 acre for recreational development and general development, or 2 acres for natural environment. But that would preclude then the ability to subdivide for unsewered lots. So I think that was about as clear as mud, I think. So feel free to sling questions my way.
And I think that makes sense. Any questions?
As Commissioner Iverson, yeah, I would suggest that makes a lot of sense. That'll keep everything in check.
All right. Any other questions? Here's one. I don't know that there's a ton to talk about, but just to note that the DNR did approve our flexibility request for the non-riparian lot area and lot width for natural environment lakes in the undeveloped lake area. So our growth area, annexation area, being 15,000 square feet and 80 at width. That would not impact the natural environment lakes that are currently within Victoria. This would only be for our lakes in the growth area. So then this is another discussion item. So if you did take a look at the red line ordinance with the DNR's comments, they had some comments that I highlighted in yellow related to our controlled access lots and docking and mooring. I think the last time we left this conversation, we had gone the route of saying we were going to only allow one dock and I think mooring. I think that's part of the discussion too, is we need to separate docks and mooring. But we were going to allow one dock and mooring, and then have a ability for a variance for those that want to do something additional. The DNR does not necessarily love building in language for variances. which I can appreciate. That makes sense. I did dig into our waterways ordinance a little bit further to get some better clarification of where we're at. Our current waterways ordinance, while it does only allow one dock, it does allow up to 3 watercraft to be moored and docked or stored overnight. So from the staff perspective, I think, again, for consistency, or proposing we write in the ordinance that it would allow 1 dock, no more than 3 unoccupied watercraft. And then that does not preclude anyone at any point, just like any other item within the zoning code, from requesting a variance to that requirement. If someone wanted to be able to moor more than 3 boats in a controlled access lot, they'd be able to bring that forward to the planning commission and the council for discussion. And there's nothing that would preclude us from granting that variance. And I would also then say that we would likely still want to adhere to the DNR's best practices when it comes to how lots need to increase as additional boats are moored in that area. It just would not necessarily be codified.
Repeat that last sentence, Marty.
What's that?
Can you repeat that last basically sentence that you said?
Yeah. So essentially there would be nothing that would preclude someone from requesting a variance to this, like they would request any a variance to any item within the zoning code. And I would say we would still want to use the DNR's best practices, the table that they had in the ordinance that said if you're over 6, you need to increase your lot size by X, Y, Z. And I think that's a good guideline and a good best practice when considering a variance to the 3 mooring of 3 watercraft. It just would not necessarily be written in code, that specific table.
Would there be any language stating that, so you have the 1 dock, 3 boats, that all 3 boats would be owned by the title holder of that land? Do we go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that could be, the way it's written now, it would not be required. It could be, any 3 boats. If, an HOA knew they had 3 mooring spots and they wanted to rent out their 3 mooring spots to first come, first serve from their development. It is very clear in the ordinance that it has to be used by the development so that it can't be turned into a marina per se, but there would be nothing that would say they would have to be HOA owned boats.
Well, actually, probably the homeowners association would take care of that. I'm sure that's the last thing they want is, people coming in and parking and having boats at these docks. So maybe that's not something that we even need to get into. I don't know. Any thoughts from any other commissioners?
Commissioner Moore here. I guess I'm not in favor of something like that. I just feel as though that becomes a management nightmare. I feel like if there's only 3 boats allowed there, it's not like it's a whole lot of boats. I feel like it's easy enough to manage with some liberal guidelines in there. Yeah.
This is Mary Jo. Can you hear me? Yeah, you can. Okay. I agree with Laura. It's a nightmare for enforcement. I also feel that a homeowner should be allowed to have a friend from the other end of the lake come over and spend the night. Maybe we should, so that's 3 boats. And who cares who owns the 3rd boat? As long as there are no more than 3 boats there. That's all.
This is Commissioner Iverson. I'm also on a HOA board, and I will only suggest that there can never be a better time than right now to make any sort of rules that we deem reasonable to do.
I was just thought, I mean, I don't think we need to, I'm not insinuating we need to police these people, but I'm going to disagree a little bit, Laura, with Commissioner Moore's comment. 3 boats is a lot on a dock. As a boat owner, it's a lot. And I know that a lot of cities do struggle with this, where people are renting out dock space, you know, to, it's Craigslist, and more power to them. It's their dock. But at the same time, I know it can get, in cities with, you know, then you have parking and you have maybe friends of this person. All of a sudden you've got 2 or 3 cars that are sitting in front of a house using this boat. And it can be a real headache. Now, Marty, I think you had a point. I think the homeowners association would take care of this, but, you know, now listening to Commissioner Iverson's comments, maybe it helps if the city puts a little teeth into this too. Here again, I'm not the guy that wants to say we're going to make everybody wear helmets. I'm not always in favor of all these additional rules, but if it does save some headaches in the future, maybe it's something we consider.
Well, Commissioner, Chair, if you feel as though the parking could be an issue, can we add language that would accommodate that would prevent additional parking? Because I think that's a relevant concern. I mean, especially when you think one boat might have 10 people. And let's say worst case scenario, 10 vehicles, that's a problem. So, and to piggyback that, is it enforceable?
I know I know it is difficult. I know cities struggle with this. I don't, Marty, if we looked at like what the Minnetonka, what Lake Minnetonka does, or
Yeah,
I'm sure we have in the past.
We did, and as my recollection from when we looked at that was that Lake Minnetonka's was really predicated on the width, the shoreline width. So the wider the shoreline, the more mooring to have. So just to clarify on this, just so we can kind of circle back on some of the existing restrictions on these controlled access lots. As you'll recall, these would still be a conditional use. So it would be something that would have to be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and would be able to talk about, whether or not it should or should not be allowed on any given lake. It would be required to, the controlled access lot would have to be at minimum the riparian lot standard. So in most cases, we're talking at least an acre lot on the water where this controlled access dock would need to be. And then again, as I interpret our waterways code, and Isaac, I probably should have had you read that before this meeting, because Isaac's a heck of a lot smarter than I am. But the way that I interpret that code is that we already currently, outside of controlled access docks, allow mooring of up to 3 boats on any of our docks within a lake. So this would be consistent with what we are currently allowing on residential riparian lots.
Just a thought. So that's what we're currently doing, and this is that controlled lot. I'm okay with that.
Okay, I'm seeing a couple head nods. All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you. All right, this one again, I don't think requires any discussion. Just to note that the DNR did approve the flexibility request for a maximum height of 35 feet in our Shoreland district, which is what our standard zoning is. And so that keeps that consistent throughout the city and does not create a bunch of non-conformities if that were to be reduced. So I think that was positive. Next, and we're getting close to the end here, vegetation management. The DNR did have just a little bit of a tweak to our language. As you'll recall, we had already discussed previously that we wanted to add in some sort of verbiage stating that the priority for tree replacement needed to be within the zone that those trees were taken down. So if you're taking down trees on a steep slope, they need to be put back on a steep slope if it is possible. So this was just some modified tweaking that the DNR had provided to state that the priority for tree replacement restoration is within the same zone, whether that be a shore impact zone or a bluff impact zone, as that of the removal and cutting. So any questions on that one? All right. Here, just another note, the DNR did approve our flexibility request for allowing up to 80% impervious within our central business district, which is where the limits currently are within our ordinance. And then that would be 25% in all of our other zoning districts. All right, and then the last one, which I think requires some discussion, is the setback variance language that we had included in a previous draft. This was something that the DNR said they would not approve. Again, part of that being that they don't like writing in language to allow for variances or to create a path for a variance. They were concerned that there was too many issues related to the shore impact zone being reduced. If you were to reduce that setback, that it was something that they did not want to consider. Similar to our other conversation with related to controlled access lots, and I did clarify this with the DNR, because there is not specific language in the code giving a path towards variance, does not, again, preclude people from requesting a variance, and from the Planning Commission approving or denying a variance, council approving or denying a variance, when there are hardships that meet our requirements for issuing a variance. The DNR would be able to provide feedback. Part of this ordinance requires that any variances within the shoreline have to be sent to the DNR to review for feedback, but they would be a feedback body only. They would not have any authority to disapprove or approve a variance. That would really be up to the local municipality if we are able to get an approved ordinance adopted. Like anyone else, if it was something they felt was egregious, they could always appeal the decision. But I think my takeaway from that was that not having specific language to allow for variance and hardship situations does not necessarily take away the city's ability to grant variances if they feel they are necessary and a hardship. So staff's proposal is to just take that section out and move forward. Any questions or comments on that?
I understand your position.
Understood.
All right. Well, that concludes my presentation. So I'm happy to take any additional questions or discussion items.
What did we decide going back to the accessory dwelling unit? Did we come to a consensus on that?
So Chair Stensland, my notes indicate that we are okay allowing them adding the additional language, but we want to tweak the zoning code section on accessory dwelling units. That would be, in my mind, that's in the just in our general zoning code on accessory structures, which will be part of our next item.
Okay. Marty, I don't have any questions for you. Any commissioners, any other, any of you have any questions? I see some head shaking.
And Chair Stensland, I think that staff would, if the commission approves, would be looking for a vote if the commission approves of the work that we've done here and based on the little minor tweaks that we'll make after today's meeting, but a recommendation on the ordinance for the council.
Marty, do you have a sample motion that you could put up?
Yeah,
And as you're doing that, I mean, I can read a sample I can give people an idea, but before I do that, or before you put it up, I'll throw that out there again. Do we have any other questions or comments?
If you give me 20 seconds here, I'll have one.
We can do that.
See if I can zoom in on this.
So commissioners, hearing no further discussion, I will ask for a motion, and remember, please state your name when moving and seconding. Commissioners, do I have a motion?
This is Commissioner Schwarting. I make a motion to recommend the City Council adopt the updated Shoreland Management Ordinance as finalized by staff based on tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwarting. Do I have a second?
Yes, Commissioner Iverson, I second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Iverson. I have a motion made by Commissioner Schwarting, seconded by Commissioner Iverson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Kuhn?
Aye.
Commissioner Gar? Commissioner Gar, there we go. Look like you were muted, Commissioner Gar.
All
I'm gonna
right,
come
Gar
back.
votes aye. I vote aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Gar.
Too many buttons
Commissioner
to
Iverson?
choose from.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Schwarting?
Aye.
Commissioner Pedersen?
Aye.
Chair Sten? Aye. Thank you. The motion carries. Okay. Our second item for discussion tonight, which includes a public hearing, is item 3.2, zoning code updates and proposed changes. Staff is asking the Planning Commission to consider recommending approval of the proposed updated zoning code language after tonight's presentation, public hearing, and discussion. For anyone watching at home wishing to participate in this public hearing, I'd like to provide a few instructions on how to do so. First, if you'd like to provide comment, please call 408-418-9388 now and enter meeting ID 126-582-8314. Again, I'll repeat that telephone number, 1-408-418-9388. Enter ID 126-582-8343. Callers, please note that you will be put on mute when you call in. You will be unmuted when the public hearing starts, and it is your turn to speak. So please stay on the line. We will start with the staff presentation. After the staff presentation, we will open the public hearing. Callers will be unmuted one at a time. When your line is unmuted, you will hear 2 beeps. Listen for those 2 beeps as an indication that it is your turn to speak. I will then give the prompt. Caller, please state your name and address. If you are on the line, please say your first and last name. I will then repeat your name so you will know that you are unmuted and have the floor. You may then provide your comments. After you have given your comments, you will be placed back on mute, and we will move on to the next caller, and so on. After all public comment has been heard, the Planning Commission will start its discussion and take any required action. Before I open the public hearing, I will now turn it over to Community and Economic Development Director Marty Dahl for staff presentation. Marty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. So yes, our second item tonight, and we've discussed a few of these items briefly as we've been going through our shoreland management ordinance, but there are some additional items within the zoning code outside of the shoreland management ordinance that will be impacted by changes we make within that section. So staff has tried to do a comprehensive look at the zoning code and tried to catch as many of those areas that we can in order to not create inconsistencies by adopting the shoreland management ordinance. So tonight we are going to go over those areas that we are proposing be updated related to the shoreline management ordinance. As you mentioned, Chair, we do need to conduct a public hearing tonight and accept any feedback or testimony. You will then have an opportunity to discuss and provide a recommendation on any of those proposed zoning changes. So just a couple of areas that we want to go through tonight, being section 16.1, our definitions, section 1810, accessory structures, which we discussed in the previous item, section 1812, decks, section 24, our residential districts, and then section 3310, preservation of natural resources. The first item is the definition of deck. This definition should look very similar to what you saw, or in fact identical, should look familiar, I should say, as it is the identical definition that we reviewed in the shoreline management ordinance. So really just trying to make sure that those 2 definitions match. Many of these items are actually listed or had been listed in the deck section of code, but because we amended the shoreline ordinance to include them, just want to make sure that our ordinances our definitions are the same throughout the ordinance. So nothing different here than anything we have previously discussed. The second is minor modification to detached garage. This is something that stemmed as we were discussing patios and how they function as accessory structures and setbacks and that sort of thing related to those structures, particularly in the Shoreland district, but just in zoning citywide. So this definition has been revised to clarify that a detached garage, an existing detached garage, if it is connected, will continue to be considered detached and not part of the principal structure if connected by an unenclosed deck, patio, or breezeway. So the intention of that is, in an instance where you're trying to play with setbacks or a number of accessory structures, connecting your detached garage with a patio or a sort of unenclosed breezeway would not allow that to be considered now an attached garage. So this is a new one outside of Shoreland. So if there are any questions or comments on that, happy to take them. All right, hearing none, I will move on. Again, this definition should look very familiar to you as well. It is the identical definition for impervious surface and lot coverage as we have in the Shoreland ordinance. So looking at making those updates to be consistent. Patio or detached deck, again, should look familiar. This is something that was undefined in our general zoning definitions. So because we are looking to define them and treat them as an accessory structure, we are proposing adding this definition to our general zoning definitions as well. Same with the permeable patio or walkway. Now there is one slight modification to this definition as it relates to how it is defined in the Shoreland ordinance. In the Shoreland ordinance, you'll recall we have the second provision that says that you are only allowed to offset your impervious surface by up to 2% with the inclusion of permeable patio or walkway. From a staff level, we feel like limiting the ability to create these permeable patios on a large swath of area in the Shoreland is very important, and not that it is unimportant in a non-Shoreland area, but that we perhaps do not need that same 2% limitation, that if someone wants to create a approved permeable patio or permeable walkway, that would offset impervious surface with no restriction level outside of a shoreline area. So any questions on that minor modification for non-shoreland permeable patios or walkways? All right. Public waters, this is the DNR's definition of public waters, which is in our Shoreland ordinance. So we have updated our public waters definition to match that. Again, addition by subtraction, essentially saying that public waters are as they're defined in statute. So taking out a lot of that unnecessary language. So moving on to steep slopes, we did discuss the steep slope item at a previous meeting, and I believe the Planning Commission was supportive of essentially reverting back to the pre-existing definition of steep slopes in the city's zoning ordinance. This was also the DNR's definition of steep slopes. And there was some question or concern about our differing definition. And so in our discussion, we had talked about just reverting back both within Shoreland and within our zoning ordinance to the previous definition of steep slopes that would have them being average slopes over 12% and measured over a horizontal distance of 50 feet or more.
Looks good.
All right, so that gets through our definitions. Any questions on any of those? All right, so section 1810 accessory structures. I think what I'll do, I actually have 2 slides that to kind of fit this whole ordinance on here. I will talk through the items that we've already noted for update, and then we can perhaps have a short discussion on how we would like to modify this to also address our issue with the accessory dwelling units. So the currently proposed language, you'll see we've tried to just consider accessory structure regardless of whether it's a building or not a building, but an accessory structure. We did add in, most of this was related to our inclusion of a patio or detached deck as an accessory structure. So, excuse me, item D here notes that no accessory structure, with the exception of a patio or a detached deck, will be located within 10 feet of the principal structure. I think the idea behind that is that someone may have a patio that comes off of their back door or something, so you don't want to require that patio to be 10 feet away from the principal structure. This is not new language, but it is pulled out to stand alone in our current ordinance. This is included in the sentence above, but that also we do not want any accessory structures located within any public easement without approval from the city. Moving down, these were some modernization language from our building department. So related to our structures in excess of 200 square feet, needing a building permit, changing that we only require electronic copy of plans, because in practice that is primarily what we are taking now. We're no longer needing these 2 sets of physical drawings, so cleaned up that language administratively. And then we also modified the sentence below here to just clear it up a little bit, and again add in our inclusion of patios or detached decks. So this states that a zoning permit, even if a building permit is not applicable, is still required for a patio or a detached deck or any accessory structures 200 square feet or less. Again, that is existing language outside of the patio or detached deck section, just cleaned up to try and make it a little easier to understand. So before talking ADUs, any questions on any of this?
Looks good, clean.
All right. Isaac, do you have the ability to pull up the accessory structure section on code and share? Because I think the section that we will want to also look at modifying related to ADUs was not a piece of what we're highlighting here.
Yeah, I'll pull that up right now. Do you want to look at the current code or?
Yeah, the current code, please, because I think the section that we need to look at updating is, let me see if I can find it here. Letter H. Oh, sorry, my letters are different on my printout, so it's actually letter G on here. So where it says no lot shall contain an attached garage together with a detached garage and a storage shed. A lot may contain a maximum of 2 of the 3. I think that might be a good section to include accessory dwelling unit as well, and then modify that to say a lot may contain a maximum of 2 of the 4. And again, that's just kind of top of head thinking through this. So certainly open to feedback and discussion.
I think that pretty much sums it up, really, what we were trying to accomplish there. Commissioners, what do you think?
Yeah, it seems like it meets our need.
Commissioner Pedersen, I know you brought this up first. I think, I mean, reading this seems like your intent. Would you have some comments?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's easy to make it easy. Just say a lot may contain a maximum of 2 of the 4. I mean, I think that would satisfy it.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, is two too few? I mean, does anybody think somebody needs a detached garage, a shed, and the other dwelling? Or, I mean, you know, my opinion's 2 out of the 4. I think Marty feels 2 out of 4. Is anyone else feel that there should be, or there could be an allowance for 3 out of 4?
I want to clarify one thing.
Commissioner, oh, go ahead.
No. Commissioner Iverson, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I just wanted to confirm, we are talking about a lot that would accommodate a duplex. So when we're talking about these 2 of 4, it's not a standard lot. We're talking lakeshore duplex size lots. Am I correct?
That would be correct within the Shoreland district. As I mentioned, when we were talking about ADUs, and this is perhaps a future discussion item for the Planning Commission. We do not have very good written standards within the code outside of Shoreland as to what those things should be and where they should be located. It is a conditional use, so I think it must have been the intent at the time that being a conditional use, it would just be addressed on a 1-by-1 basis as to how big a lot needs to be that can accommodate it. But yes, that would be true for Shoreland district. That would not necessarily be true for outside of Shoreland district. But in both areas, it would still be a conditional use permit required.
Okay, they're both coming to us. Okay.
This is Commissioner Everson. I think Marty did substantiate what I was going to say. That we did view that it's the 2 structures maximum.
I agree. This is the Shoreline district. I think that's acceptable.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay.
All right. So
Thanks
we
for
will.
bringing that up.
Yeah, we will make that modification to the accessory structure section to have that included if the ordinance updates are adopted.
Okay.
All right. So section 1812 decks, we made some minor modifications to this. So this is when I mentioned that the language that we included in the definition of deck was pre-existing. This is where it existed, was in section 1812 that talked about the 30 inches above grade, the frost footings, etc. So we do want to just modify this again with some of those changes we made to the definition to note that it's or directly abutting the principal structure. We're telling you exactly where it's defined. And then we did want to make a note in this section related to patios or detached decks that as they are defined in this code shall be considered an accessory structure and subject to accessory structure setbacks. All right. So again, a lot of this stems from the patios or detached decks. This would be an update to the bulk regulations within all of our residential districts that would allow patios or detached decks as a permitted use in residential, and then provides some setbacks for rear, side yard, and front yard for those types of structures. These are the same setbacks as one would have with a like a shed or something. It's the identical setback, so it'd be treated the same way as those other accessory structures in residential districts. This was something that I noticed when I was looking at the bulk regulations, was that our minimum lot area and our minimum lot width, as noted in our residential district for the Lake Minnetonka residential district, was conflicting with what the Shoreland ordinance called for non-riparian lot area and minimum lot width. So this is just updating that residential district section to be consistent with what is in the Shoreland ordinance. So we had for some time had two conflicting items within those ordinances, and kind of the proof in the pudding of why we're looking at all these other sections as well when an ordinance changes. All right, and then I believe this is our last one. So section 3310, preservation of natural resources. This is, again, identical to the last time we spoke about this item. We did not modify anything since our last discussion, but this is with the change of steep slopes, this section, steep slope definition, this section needed to be updated. And I think the intent of the ordinance is that we want to prohibit clear cutting, which is a complete cutting of everything on a steep slope, but we are allowing clearing and trimming of trees and shrubs pursuant to our tree preservation and replacement ordinance, so which would require replacement of calculation of trees that are removed, and then that ground cover is retained and maintenance monitoring established if trees are coming down in those areas. With that, Chair, that concludes my presentation, so I will turn it back to you if you wish to open the public hearing.
Okay, I will now open the public hearing to any callers. And staff, I think we have a caller?
Chair, fellow commissioners, we may have a caller. Would number 6129 unmute themselves and address the committee if wishing to speak?
If you're addressing this to Peter Coyle, I don't have any comments on the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Chair, that is all the callers we have on the line.
Okay. Hearing no additional public input, commissioners, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Commissioner Iverson, so moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Iverson. Is there a second?
Commissioner Patterson, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. I have a motion from Commissioner Iverson, seconded by Commissioner Patterson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Kuhn?
Aye.
Commissioner Kuhn?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Gar?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Iverson?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Schwarting?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Pedersen?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries. The public portion of the meeting is now closed. I will now open the floor to the Planning Commission. Commissioners, do you have any further questions or comments for Marty and staff?
My only comment is just it's been thoroughly reviewed and processed, and I think, Marty, I think you, along with everyone else with the city, have done a fantastic job with the DNR to accommodate and take into all considerations.
Thank you.
Commissioner Moore, I'll second that. Marty and staff, I think you've done a tremendous job, and also all the commissioners, thanks for all your input. Hearing no more discussion, I will ask for a motion. Marty, I'm wondering, can you want to put up a motion for this, or commissioner, somebody want to take a stab at? Oh, he's ready right there.
Can you see that one?
I can. So, commission, is there a motion?
That's Commissioner Iverson. I make a motion to approve the updated zoning code language.
Marty, is that acceptable, or would you like it to be a little closer to what you have written down there?
Yeah. I think technically, Chair, I think the motion should be to recommend that the council approve the updated language.
Oh,
John, can you see that on screen?
nope. I don't have a screen here, but I would second that.
I don't think I can make the motion.
No, I don't. No.
I can make a stab at it.
Okay, Commissioner Moore?
I'd like to motion to recommend the City Council adopt revisions to the City of Victoria's zoning code as presented by staff.
Okay, is there a second?
Commissioner Iverson, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Iverson. I have a motion from Commissioner Moore. It's been seconded twice by Commissioner Iverson. I would not, do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, I will now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Kuhn,
Aye.
Commissioner Gar,
Aye.
thank you. Commissioner Iverson,
Aye.
Commissioner Moore,
Aye.
Commissioner Smarting,
Aye.
Commissioner Pedersen,
Aye.
Chair Stensland, aye. Thank you. The motion carries. Great job, everyone. Now we will go to miscellaneous. We'll move on to the miscellaneous section. Staff, do you have any miscellaneous items this evening?
Chair, Commissioners, the only item from staff is just a reminder, we do not have a planning commission next Tuesday, the 3rd, due to Election Day. That is why we have held our meeting tonight a little bit out of schedule.
Can I ask, how's the construction coming at City Hall?
Well, it is taking shape. I would be lying if I said I was extremely optimistic that we won't be doing this virtually next time, but we are keeping our fingers crossed that they will finish in a timely fashion.
Well, I have to say it's a lot easier in person, but I think we got this down. I have to say this was a great meeting, folks. I think it actually flowed pretty well. So thank you, everyone, for your participation. Commission, do we have any miscellaneous items tonight?
This is Commissioner Iverson. I will try not to take up too much of everyone's time. I was a guest of the Park and Rec Committee last week for one of their meetings, and we did a tour of Wasserman Park. And I got to tell you, it is impressive, and that's probably an understatement. It's nearing completion. It was cold and wet and muddy when we did the tour, but it is just truly a showcase. I had followed the process for Wasserman Park pretty extensively, and there was some creative funding for the park at the same time, and it all came together, and it's extremely impressive. It's something that when everyone has an opportunity in warmer weather to take a tour of this. That said, I also stated to Ann Mankey that I would give her full credit for the end result of Wasserman Park. Thank you.
Thanks. That's great to hear, and I hope they remember us planning commissioners when they do that initial tour. That would be great to see it. I know I drive by it every single day, and I can't tell you when I'm on my bicycle how many times I've been tempted to ride down there, but I've been a good steward, and I see those signs, and it says absolutely no entry. So I haven't rode my bike down there, but I've wanted to. That building looks beautiful. Really nice.
Chair, Commissioners.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
And the opportunity for kids, the opportunity for families, it's just remarkable. And there's enough remote area there at the same time to really give it a real sense of wilderness in within the city.
Chair, Commissioner, sorry, I was just going to chime in that the city had been intending on doing a ribbon cutting for the park yet this late fall. That has now been postponed due to weather until next spring, but there will be a ribbon cutting event. Hopefully by next spring we will have some less restrictions and be able to get some folks together, but I'll make sure to keep you aware of the timing on that as we get through this winter and back into spring.
That's awesome. Any other comments or miscellaneous items from the commission? Well, if there's no more items tonight, is there a motion to adjourn?
This Commissioner Iverson, I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Moore, I'd like to motion that we second.
I have a motion made by Commissioner Iverson, seconded by Commissioner Moore. Thank you both. I will now take a roll call vote. Commissioner Kuhn?
Aye. Aye.
Commissioner Gar?
Aye.
Commissioner Iverson?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Swarting?
Aye.
Commissioner Pedersen?
Aye.
Chair Stensland? Aye. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Talk with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Excellent meeting.